happening? Where am I? What's going on? And then I hear, those are not your parents. I am. And that is not your life. This is. And it gave me my voice. My throat chakra opened. I call it my inner dragon slayer came alive, deep and strong inside of me. And I knew I had purpose, and I knew there was a reason I was here, and it was all divine.
So hi everybody, this is Heather Kate with Jana Wilson, who has written an amazing book about her astounding life. She is a healer and a coach with a special program and process called the Emotional Healing Technique. I think that's correct. And we're going to cover a couple of things today, like Inner Dragon Slayer, Soul Slap, and transforming your life, even from a tragically traumatic childhood, and how you can use some of those things to create a life that you really want. Or how, tell us the process, Jana. But I want to first say thank you. I'm honored, absolutely honored to be talking with you. I heard about you a number of years ago, and it is such a pleasure to be talking with you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So some of what Jana works with are unique emotional intelligence tools and transformational processes. And I love how you talk about this. I don't know, do you want to cover like a quick synopsis of your book, your childhood, or sort of give it. I noticed on your Facebook page that you were in the process at recently, I think, of doing the audio version of your book, reading it yourself. And I always love those. I think they're way more interesting to listen to than when there's a narrator. As good as the narrators are, it's not the same as the author's voice. But it's, you mentioned that it's extremely difficult to go back to some of these things and use other people's voices when there were some seriously traumatic situations.
Yeah, Heather, I had no idea. I just thought, oh, okay, I wrote the book, I've read it out loud. I mean, certainly I get emotional often when I read it. There's certain parts of it that are possibly re-traumatizing. I'm observing and I'm aware of that now. I booked a studio about a week and a half ago. I went in and from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., I muscled my way through 20 chapters. When I left, I collapsed, and I've been really in a tailspin since then. Just the work never ends. Right. So it was just another level or layer peeling back of when I embodied the voice of my father or the voice of my mother, I embodied everybody's, voice, and I became them to read it. And it was a little too much on me. I think I'm going to have to take some time before I go back and redo some of that. I listened to it, and it was really upsetting as well. So I do have an intent to still read the book for Audible. I need to find out what works best for me in honoring my emotions, my little Jana, my inner child.
Yes, that's what the book is all about. I think I skipped that part. It's connecting with your inner child and reparenting yourself to health and well-being.
Yes. And I feel like when I was writing the book, certainly there were times where I shared stories that I would have to step away from, do the work. And the work, when I say that, what I mean is reparent little Jana, listen to her. What am I sharing in the book that's not feeling good? Because I would start to have maybe anxiety or deep grief so that I took things out. I actually didn't share all the trauma. Because there were some things that would have, also brought other people that were in my life, cousins and some people who I really just felt like it didn't serve. I had so much trauma already. I could pick and choose, and I picked kind of the biggest things. And So
There's
yeah,
a significant amount of trauma in this book. It's anybody who's had, we'll just put it nicely, gently, a difficult childhood, or been through domestic violence of any sort. This book will make you know for sure that you are not alone, and
yes.
give you some hope for a path forward, for you finding your own path forward.
Yeah,
Because
thank
the
you for
fact that you
saying that. Because I've heard a lot of people in these interviews I've been doing for the publicity for the book is and some of the reviews as well. I don't believe with this belief that being triggered and having trigger warnings is
right,
bad or something to be avoided. I think it's a natural part of life. I feel like, what we can't feel, we can't heal. Right. And so, every
yeah,
human being alive has been triggered in some way. And it's about developing the skill to manage those triggers, like you just so eloquently said, that I give the reader. It's a prescriptive memoir. So there's 11 chapters where I've given little boxes at the end of the chapter to share with the reader, in addition to what I'm sharing in the story as well. So,
yes.
yeah.
They're almost like really good journal prompts. A lot of people are familiar with the term journal prompt. And
Mm-hmm.
after you've read, this situation that you went through it, the little box at the end really applies to those situations. So they're very helpful.
Yes, yeah, and
Yeah.
research also shows that trigger warnings do not work. That they actually don't reduce the negative reaction or even increase avoidance of not reading or watching the show.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it makes sense because if we don't have the tools to cope, right, with emotional stress, warning that stress is coming, won't have an impact. So, I wrote the book to be vulnerable, to be courageous, really, to say, yes, I've arrived at a place in my life. I've had success. I have love. I've achieved a lot that I've set out to do, and certainly could have been a statistic, right? I grew up very poor, just to let the listeners know a little bit about my background. My mother um, lost her father at a young age, and that trauma really warped her personality, and she was diagnosed with bipolar, and she attempted suicide several times. I found her with her wrist cut, and so she was a very complicated person. And my father was a rageaholic. He was an alcoholic. He was every kind of aholic I think you could, except for workaholic. He was definitely not
It's
that.
not.
He was a lazy aholic. And so being raised with parents, the adverse childhood experiences, clinicians give, it's a 10 question, really simple questions to ascertain how much trauma someone's been through. I scored 10 out of the 10. I had a stepfather who's serving life in prison for murder. I mean, so when you look
And
at,
he was the good one.
and he was the good one. Yeah. Yeah. And I still have a relationship with him. We still talk. He teaches meditation in prison. He's been on his spiritual path pretty much since he went to prison. He became a follower of Yogananda. He's probably more Buddhist now. And yeah, just a wonderful human being who, if you asked him, he's saying it's his karma. He's paid his debts. So yeah.
Oh, it is almost like he became spiritually infected. In the, in the, it seemed like he was a really good guy, a really good, genuinely good guy who somehow became, possessed or infected,
Mm-hmm.
spiritually infected.
Mm-hmm.
And then, made some bad choices slash, killed a couple people.
Yeah.
And it's, I think that's an interesting part of the book too. And you kind of bring it up, and then kind of like mention it, but it's like something to think about. We all have these choices, and it's a really good time to do something like read your book, go to your retreats. We can make these changes within ourselves, and it's so important. It's possible. It's possible to heal. It's possible to change. Um, but it's I think it's fundamental to have a spiritual approach, which you do. And there are two really mystical experiences that you mention in the book. One when you are 12 and
Hmm.
you are trying to survive something that feels unsurvivable. And then I don't know if you want to give this away or not, so I'm just going to say it's at the end of the book, towards the end of the book, with your dad.
Yeah, I had actually even more. The first one I think was at that pool in Atlanta. I have awareness at 18 months old,
Oh, that
wanting,
too. Yes,
yeah,
many. Okay, so
wanting,
there's several in the book.
yeah. And then, of course, church. I grew up in the South in the Bible Belt. A lot of, fire and damnation. And if you don't behave a certain way, you're going to, so I grew up in a lot of fear and constriction
Mhm.
but then sometimes we would go to this Pentecostal church and they would praise God and speak in tongues. And as a child, I created this really deep inner resource connection to spirit. It's why I really practice spiritual psychology now. Everything I do has
Yes,
the component of connecting to spirit, finding what is that for each individual. It doesn't have to be
yes,
religion, right?
yes.
It's something spiritual. But I've been blessed. I believe that everybody's operating from different levels of consciousness and different soul ages.
Yeah.
And I believe, in retrospect, looking back upon my life, throughout my life, I became aware of this, certainly probably by the time I was in my late 20s, aware that I knew things way before my chronological age.
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of a gift of our trauma too. Sometimes it really wakes us up. It was like a big soul awakening.
I feel like some of us come in with a lot of, we're powerful healers coming in, but we come through, of some people call it like a veil of forgetfulness or amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
We know a
Yes.
lot of stuff, but then when we come here as humans, part of the arrangement is that we forget. Now, honestly, I don't know why that's such a good thing. It's like very, it's profoundly more difficult when you don't know that there's this spiritual connection available. And one of the things that I thought was so profound was your experience while you were standing looking up at the night sky praying for help, and that you had this really cosmic travel, connection with the divine. And can you share just a little bit about that with us?
Oh, yes, I would love to. I opened the book up with that prologue. Mom and dad, were going at it again, or rather, dad was beating my mother, and she's trying to protect herself from being totally, beaten to death. And at 12, my
Literally,
brother,
folks.
what's that?
Literally, literally.
Literally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, they would really go at it. And so my brother wasn't there. He was always my kind of, safety net and protector. And I'm praying to God to save me. And what I experienced was really a near-death experience. I watched a
Yep.
documentary on near-death experiences, and I believe the trauma took me into that state. I was pulled out of my body. I could still see little Jana there wringing her hands and praying to God to save her. And then I felt a peace that is often described that passes all understanding, a sense of just safety and lightness of being. And I remember very vividly thinking, if I've died, then I'm good with that. Okay, this is good. Let's go. I'm ready. And then I kind of inquisitively, in my mind was like, what's happening? Where am I? What's going on? And then I'm very clairaudient. I hear Those are not your parents. I am. And that is not your life. This is. And when I heard this is, I looked around and I knew I was one with this universe and the cosmos and the star nebulas and galaxies, and I was being held, and everything was going to be okay. It was okay. It was better than okay. It was perfect. And then boom, I was back in my body. But as soon as I remember falling into the heaviness of the body again, I immediately was different. I knew a shift had happened. And it gave me my voice. My throat chakra opened. I was able to say things to my parents I never could say before. I call it my inner dragon slayer came alive, and she, something deep and strong inside of me, and I knew I had purpose, and I knew there was a reason I was here, and it was all divine. And yeah, it was the most profound experience. Certainly not the last one I've had. I've had other ones similar, right?
Oh, really?
The night before I got on that plane to meet my husband, I was in
Oh, right.
Esalen, right, at a meditation retreat, and I had been going really deep, about 6 hours a day, meditating with the great Sally Kempton, who just left her body recently. And Spirit told me to leave, and I listened, and I left, paid thousands of dollars for that retreat, but I left early because I heard the voice say leave. And the next day, or that night, little Jana appeared across a table, and I entered her vision, and she showed me my life, and she showed me, it's that Rumi poem, by God,
Yes.
when you see the beauty of yourself, you'll fall down and on. I just saw my strength, and I saw my heart, and I just saw, that I am a remarkable human. I did go through a lot, and the healings never ends. I'm going through another, I think, putting the book out there now, and some people
Mm-hmm.
don't understand this kind of work and this kind of healing. And I've had beautiful reviews, but the mind captures the one that says, oh, this is woo woo BS, and it hurts, because I was really vulnerable in putting my story out, and I realize, I know
Very,
not
very.
everybody's going to get it, right?
Oh, some of us very much get it, and it's very
Yes.
helpful. It
Yes.
is very helpful.
Thank
This is
you.
a hard journey that you have had. But I think, well, I've done surveys in, for instance, Facebook groups with like literally 400,000 women, and hundreds of thousands of women responded to me and said that the emotional scars that they endured from a violent or toxic relationship were far more hurtful to them, and that they had never healed from them, even, decades later, than physical abuse. And some of
Mhm.
them still have physical pain. They have forever, in this lifetime, forever trauma, they've broken bones, missing limbs. They have had severe physical trauma, and yet they have said that the thing they can't seem to recover from is what they consider to be like the emotional or verbal abuse. And yet, what you do and what I do is the healing, the spiritual healing, the underpinnings, what some people can't go towards because they're afraid of
Mhm.
it, but it's called, they're the
Mhm.
ones calling it, it's woo woo BS, but it's the key to healing.
Exactly. Because we
It's the,
cannot reach the heart through the mind,
yeah,
and the heart is where the healing happens. It's powerful. Our heart, as
yes,
a heart math facilitator, I learned these things, that it radiates an electromagnetic field that's strong enough to light a light bulb. It's
yes,
5,000 times stronger than the brain. And most people,
yes,
go to their mind, and they're
yes,
disconnected from their heart. And, we're
yes,
seeing it in the world too, Heather, that it's a
yes.
spiritual crisis that people are going through,
Uh-huh.
identity crisis. They identify with nationality, with religion, with
Yep.
gender, with all these things, and they don't know the true nature is that they are divine. They are children of God. They are God. They aren't separate. And I
Yeah.
think when we can bring that into healing,
Mm-hmm.
right, and remember
Mm-hmm.
and support people to really fall in love with their divinity versus their humanity, they can heal.
I agree 100%. And it's a spiritual war. And,
Yes.
you know, you and I are calling on spiritual warriors to stand up, to rise up, you know, come to us and get healing, tap into your gifts, learn how to use them for yourself and
Yeah.
for the world, because everybody's here for a unique and special mission and we need you. So, you know, find whatever works for you to do this, and you know, you offer amazing options for that. In fact, if you'd like to mention them or talk about it a little bit, this is a great moment for that.
Sure. I think when I was a little girl, I wanted to grow up and be a preacher.
Did you? Perfect, here you
I
are.
did. I did. Now my ministry is called Emotional Healing Retreats, and the first couple days of a retreat, I know I've done the work. If I can connect someone, if they start crying, they'll heal. If they can feel the presence, I no longer identify with a religion. I certainly feel Christ's presence within me as I do
Mhm.
Buddha and any great of the great teachers. But the greatest compliment I get is usually during the breath work session after they tell me, I'm not Christian, but I felt the presence of Jesus, or I felt angels, or my grandmother came to me, or and I just had work with a client whose grandmother was in the Holocaust, and
Oh.
she was her great grandmother, and she was named after her, and she hated her name. It was Miriam, and she said it was an old lady's name, and this woman was in her 30s, and she said, after breath work the next day, she was just crying, and she said, Jana, I intellectually understand spirituality, and I've done all these things, and I never felt it though. And she said,
Mm,
last night my
mm.
grandmother came and she showed me how strong I am and how powerful I am, and how the ancestral lineage of all the women in my family, and it was so healing. It wasn't shadow work. It wasn't all these maybe intellectual concepts. It was really the connection to spirit that,
Mm.
and her great grandmother.
And being able to connect with your ancestors is such a powerful, comforting, healing thing, you know, as long as they're good. But you can filter for that. You can, you know, it's remarkable and absolutely wonderful. So I think that's really beautiful. And I don't know, did her grandmother tell her the meaning of the name
Yeah,
Miriam?
she knew. Yes,
So
yes.
she did know. Okay, so
Yeah,
for those of you who don't know, it means revolution or rebellion. And
yes. Yeah, and
yeah.
so she left the retreat, and when she wrote a beautiful testimonial on my website, and she said, that you gave me the gift of my name, a name in Hebrew, a name in Judaism. It's so significant. And she had
Extremely
warred
powerful.
against it, and she had wanted a new name, and she was angry that she was named that, and she was teased by other kids growing up, like I forget what she said they would call her, old lady Miriam, and she just
She now that she knows, it's a completely different, it's like boom.
yeah, and she's doing fantastic now. But yeah, the
Good.
emotional healing system certainly isn't anything that I created, that came from me. It came from spirit. It came from teachings that go back 6,000 years. But I
Yeah.
began to see in my own healing process, there were fundamental things that if they taught us, say even started in school with, say, emotional intelligence skills, then we could really manage our life, and more importantly, master our emotions instead of being a slave to them. And the
Hmm.
primary thing was, of course, meditation
Yeah.
and learning how to observe the mind and have mastery over it. and then connecting. Of course, the longer you meditate, of course, you start, dipping into stillness and eavesdropping on the mind of God, and starting to, having all the synchronicities and developing extrasensory perception. And then that really starts tapping you in. And, so healing can happen because you have a baseline, you're stable, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so often people go to a therapist and they're meeting everything from the mind and not from silence and stillness and the soul.
And feelings, like we're
And
taught to
feeling.
discount our feelings, which I think
Yes.
connects with, your inner child approach. And our feelings are fundamental and we
Yes.
need them. And once we honor them, act on them, and work with them, just as if you're, working with your inner child, sort of same, um, you get a powerful guiding and healing through life that is really beautiful and fun.
It is, because the child is, they live in a sense of wonder, and that part of us, our emotional self, is the inner child, just so the listeners know that's what we're talking about. And we're born, and we could say, okay, we're a human being. An infant is being, it sleeps a lot. As long as it's getting its needs met, it's just being. And then
Mhm.
it learns to emote, right? A human feeling. And then many people get stuck in that. We have drama queens, emotional addicts, people who aren't getting their needs met. Certainly a lot of people who read my book, there's universal themes throughout it, but they may, I really want people to understand that, hey, I honor all trauma. Trauma for me is not so much the experience that happened on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst and 1 being a minor. There's not big traumas and little traumas to me. To a child, if a parent doesn't see or hear them, that's a trauma. A parent who
Mhm.
can't regulate their emotions, that's a trauma. A parent
Mhm.
who lives vicariously through them, whose stage parent pushes them, all of that, that's a trauma to a child. So there's other types of traumas, and they should never be minimized or negated, I believe.
100% agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so then, I feel like, I heard Deepak, because I trained with Deepak, and he would always talk about this, the 4 states of being: human feeling, human thinking. Go to school, learn how to think. People get stuck in that. They're lifelong learners. I certainly am, but I'm talking about people who only identify with the mind and the intellect, right? Not with
Mhm.
feelings. And then
Mhm.
human doing. Go out now, work, and that's what we're taught. And so everybody is just
Yeah.
out busy doing in this world, and this world will never bring us the happiness that we're seeking. It's always inside, and we have to source it from being, right? That human being.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
learned that, I think, as a child in nature. Nature was my refuge. Climbing
Mhm.
trees, talking to the trees. Like, I love Pippi
Yep.
Longstocking.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I hadn't thought about her in a while, but yeah.
I know. I love those books. And I recently was talking to a client, and I said, I should have put that in my book, because I read them all the time. I just lived in this adventure land
Mhm.
of, the inner child. And then now, as an adult in my 20s, I began with John Bradshaw, learning about inner child work, and then just kept deepening it and deepening it. And now I've developed a 3-step reparenting process. I teach people to really connect and reparent themselves, be the loving mother and father that maybe they didn't have.
Mhm. Yep. To provide the inner child with the things that they need now because they
Now,
still need
yes,
them.
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
instance, this week, a false belief of not being good enough, when you put yourself out into the world, as I know you have, and you're giving your gifts and people don't receive it, and it doesn't matter what they think. But if it bothers you, if you're affected by it, there's something inside of you, right? It's the mirror of relationship, it's the shadow. So I had another experience this week of not being good enough, and always, and my little girl showed me, you just push me harshly. Nothing's
Mm.
ever enough. the book was written, why does it have to be a bestseller, or why do you care what people think about it? Let it all go. You just keep pushing and pushing. So it was like a whole other layer I've been going through of healing of, yeah.
I think you are an amazing person, and you do have amazing drive, which has been a survival weapon for one thing, but also, amazing success. And I think sometimes when there's something that works for us, if we're in a tough time, then we automatically shift into that gear
Yes. Yeah.
just in case, and it's almost like autopilot. Um, so that's, it's very understandable. And especially, when we're in the midst of a difficult situation here now, like in this now time, then our perception of a bigger situation is affected. So that's 100%, normal. And of course, you want your book to be a bestseller. That's why we write stuff, so that it gets out there, so that people can read it. And then the way that happens is that people buy it and share it, tell everybody about it.
I think you would agree too. There's so many like teachers and spiritual leaders, thought leaders who have written books, who have a big name. And, I share obviously about, my teacher and my book and how I put her on a pedestal. And we think that these
Debbie
people,
Ford.
yes, that they've arrived, right? That they've got it figured out. And, Debbie was a complicated person, like we all are. And she wasn't sharing what was actually happening in her life presently. Now, I was in an inner circle, so I knew, and I wanted to hear on stage her be vulnerable with everybody and say, and the realization came to me was, she is my anti-teacher. She's teaching me what not to do. If I want to be a vulnerable, raw, healer, show people what it looks like, be messy, be willing to show them you haven't arrived.
Mm. Well, then it's yeah, okay. So, it's a different way. It's same different word, same concept, that we're always on the journey. We're always journeying
Always.
together.
That's right.
And
Yes.
so it's definitely a process. And this came up recently in one of the groups that I was leading, but that basically, where we learn on a spiral, and although it may seem like we're back in the same place, we have gotten further ahead, but it can be very frustrating to feel like you're covering the same territory, and it's not exactly the same. It may be the same subject, but you have
Right.
advanced. But
Yes.
everything in the universe works together to help us keep getting better and better and better. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it's attachment, like one of the great spiritual traditions of the East, Vedanta, non-dualism, talks about this idea of, that we create suffering, one, because we don't know who we truly are, that we are spirit, that we're not these humans that we think, we're Dr. Simon, Deepak's partner, he used to say, we're spirit and drag, we're wearing these human body suits, that we're and so
That's
I
great.
think about that often, but it's attachments, right? So attachment is one of the kleshas, one of the poisons that the teaching points to, and aversions, resistance to what's happening. We don't want it to be happening. So just observing, the more you're on this, like you said, I did a podcast this morning and their name of their podcast was spiraling up or something,
Oh,
and it
cool.
was the exact same that you said. In Humanity Ascending, Barbara Marx Hubbard shows this kind of evolutionary process of we go into a peak and then we drop back down. And then of course, when we come back up, we're higher than we were before. But it's still, when we drop, it's a feeling of an ego death, which is good. We want that ego, we want to befriend it, but it needs to die as well. And for me, in all transparency, there was identification of, spirit showing me, you're identifying too much with the book or with the story, or do people like it? Do they get it? Do they detach? The most detached wins.
Well, good job. Good
So
job.
detach from it and, allow it to have it and look at myself. And when I say the work never ends, I think many people come to us and they want us to appear we've got it figured out so they can be certain. And listen, there is nothing certain about this world. We're on a rock right now, spinning through space, 70,000 miles an hour. It's all a mystery, right?
Yes.
We got to
Yes. Yeah.
detach. And so that's really what I'm saying is we've got to get comfortable with the unknown. We got to fall in love with it. And I think that scares most of us, especially for a traumatized inner child like mine. She wants to control things and hold on. And
Completely understandable.
yeah. And so that's
Completely
what I'm
understandable.
unraveling another layer of that, of
Hmm.
detach, Jana. You're out of control and it's okay.
I think that's part of where it's so important to be able to listen to your inner child, your spirit, your
Mm-hmm.
feelings, your emotions, and to let those, guide you as you are flowing forward or whichever direction, because you might be stuck in a big spin or whatever, but it's let those feelings come through. So yeah, it's great to detach, and I think it's also crucial, as you talk about, to acknowledge the feelings and then work with them
Mm-hmm.
as much as you can and then detach.
Well, it first requires detachment because if you're gripping, you can't use the tools, right? So it's awareness, one, right? So I
Yeah.
became aware. I'm attached to something because I'm creating suffering. Soon as I became aware, then I began to ask the question, and it's what I teach in the emotional healing system. It's psychosynthesis. So are you familiar with psychosynthesis?
No, I mean, I
Okay.
understand the root words, but
So
okay, this is a
yeah,
great time to explain it. Yeah,
synthesizing, yeah, the psyche, right? Just simply. So
putting the
Roberto
pieces together.
Assagioli, yeah, he was a contemporary with Freud and Jung around the same time, and he saw our psyche as whole, not fragmented, that we have parts. And of course now we know of parts therapy, and all these parts could be light and dark, right? The shadow. And that's kind of where Jungian shadow work and a lot of that, teaching comes from. And how can I make peace? Because the world, the way we're brought up is you need to be good. And Jung would say, I'd rather be whole than good, right? I'd rather be a whole person than just a
Yeah.
good person. So when I
Hmm.
start to observe I'm suffering, I take responsibility for it. But thankfully, I always tell clients, there's no difference between you and I. The difference is I have tools, and my refractory, my ability to move through a difficult time or difficult emotion is like compared to what you is nano speed, right? I can move through things quicker because I have tools. And I mean, I wish our
Yeah.
school systems taught more tools and taught this emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
right?
I think they don't want people to have it because then people stay stuck and following rules that somebody else gives them, instead of looking for a guru or somebody who has it all together to give them the perfect answer, then
Exactly.
listening to what they need on the inside and using their compassion both for themselves and for other people.
Exactly. Yes, I agree. Yeah, it's it's all a mystery. And if we can fall in love with this mystery and fall in love with the unknown, then that's when the magic starts to happen, right? That's when,
Yes, amazing things.
yeah, I mean, it certainly was for me. Writing the book, one of the things that stood out a lot when I was writing stories was, wow, my imagination, and what part of us? It's the child, right? That has the wild imagination.
Yep.
So I started to see maybe it was disassociation. Maybe that's what psychology would call it, whatever it was, to cope with the trauma that I was going through, right?
Hmm.
It saved me. And then all of a
Yes.
sudden I would manifest, hey, an Elvis concert. I would
That was
manifest.
amazing. That was amazing. Oh yeah, there's some really fun things in the book, you guys. You've got to read the book. There,
Thank you.
Jana has Jana has manifested from childhood some of the most amazing experiences, including sort of meeting Elvis. So,
Yeah. I certainly got invited to his at 8 years old to his suite. And
yeah,
yeah.
safely with her mother. It was all cool. It was
Yeah, yeah.
no
Wasn't anything
creepy.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was all good. It was, yeah,
But like
absolutely
the
amazing.
Costa Rica, like
Mhm.
all the things that I manifested for a girl that was living in such extreme poverty and, low socioeconomic, being called white trash, labeled, a lot of ugly stuff, to have manifested those things. There's absolutely no way you can't say that I did it through my imagination.
Right. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was it was very clear manifesting. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I liked about it was that you manifested these opportunities and then you jumped on them. So you didn't
Mm-hmm.
wait. You were manifesting, you were daydreaming about for instance going to Costa Rica, and like basically friend dropped by and said, "Hey, let's do anything you guys want to do." And you're like, Costa Rica right now.
Yes.
Oh, like, good for you. Sometimes I sit and think about things, I'm trying to get away from feeling like, oh, I need to be very strategic about stuff. And I'm like, no, sometimes I gotta let it flow and then jump
Right.
on an opportunity when it comes. And I think
Yeah,
that's like
because
one of
little
the really fun
Heather's
things.
probably going, come on, let's do it, let's do it. And then, the more
Yes.
cautious Heather's going, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. And I
Well,
was
I hope
actually,
I inspired you to go for it some.
yes, yes, absolutely. Um, I have a question that keeps coming to mind, slightly different topic about Debbie Ford, and you were in her inner circle. Debbie Ford is was a big. She's passed on, but she was a really big teacher who was very well known. She wrote a lot of books. She had a big business. She was on Oprah, and you were in her organization. You and your husband at
Hmm.
the time. Um, and then it was kind of hard to leave, even though you could see that there were some things that you were not comfortable with. Can can you tell us a little bit about how you finally were able to disengage yourself, even though it took a little while and it was a little bit
Sure.
difficult?
Yeah. So Debbie, first I want to say she, definitely was probably one of my greatest teachers and my anti-teacher. She was both, because we're all wabi sabi. It's a mixed bag, right? But
Yep.
when I heard
Yep.
Debbie Ford speak, I was 36 years old. She was in Miami and she got on stage at a Hay House big, spiritual conference and said, "Hi, I'm Debbie Ford and I'm a bitch." And I thought, I am too, but I'm trying to hide that stuff. You're supposed to teach me how to get rid of. So I had been on a spiritual path for a long time at that point, right? Like 15
Mhm.
years. And I was, she's standing on stage and owning something that I thought you don't do, you're not supposed to
We
be.
were totally, so women of our age were totally taught to never be
Never.
that.
Yeah. And
We
if
were
somebody
supposed to be
called me
very
a
nice and
bitch,
compliant.
right, in my mind, it was 100% the totality of me was a bitch. Now,
Yeah.
I knew because of my childhood, I had anger and I could really advocate because, as you
Good
know,
for you.
when I got my Dragon Slayer, that we could call that the bitch, right? Because I could really pick stuff out and talk about the
Yeah.
elephant in the room. And of
And she
course,
named it. Oh my.
yes. And
Yes.
so I drank the Kool-Aid. And from that point, I started flying to California and I did all her trainings and I became really one of her top students, right? One time I had a client, he called me and he said, have you ever heard of Debbie Ford? And this was after I'd already left the organization. And I said, why are you asking me this? And he said, I just heard her speak in San Diego, and I swear I felt like I was listening to you from stage. So I definitely modeled myself after Debbie. Debbie resonated. She was a soul slapper. She could she could see someone's shadow and hone right in, and she had chutzpah. She was a
Mhm.
Jewish woman. She was like tough, and she could go right in and let someone know. I could tell you stories that would just blow you away of watching her do that. And I spent time with her. I want to know, how do you do that, Debbie? And she would tell me, and so it was easy. It's just whatever somebody's making you believe about them, just go to the opposite. If they're all put together and they're all, know that somewhere in their life, they're a mess. So she just helped me, and she really worked with me. I was very fortunate. And, but I had put her on a pedestal. And Debbie, like all of us, humans are messy. Being human is messy. She catapulted really quick to New York Times bestseller. Her book, her sister was very instrumental in that. Her sister was Deepak's publicist. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's not what it's who you know. And
Mhm.
so she was, it was a little much for her. So she ended up in the hospital, and then found out she had stomach cancer. It went into remission. By
Oh,
the time I began working with her, it was in remission, and not many of us knew. I did not know about her illness. I just knew that the closest people around her were always worried about her. Is she
oh,
tired? Is she slept enough? Is she drinking enough? It was always kind of
oh,
handlers. And
yeah.
so I think in retrospect too, that appeared to me very dysfunctional, the fawning and the, caretaking over her. And she certainly loved that adoration.
Mhm.
I I think when you have a teacher who changes your life to the extent that she pointed a teaching that I was ready for. When the student's ready, the teacher appears. Debbie
Yep.
was that for me.
Yep.
And I sold my home. I did everything. I moved across the country from Florida to
Right.
California. And my ex-husband became marketing partners. We invested a large amount of money and began creating content and running events for her around the country. And I was very thoughtful in how I shared that. I wanted the reader to understand that these relationships with teachers can be complicated because we do put them on
Mhm.
pedestals. But in the
Mhm.
end, once I left Debbie and I went to Deepak, he and Dr. Simon were very different. Deepak is known for saying, if somebody's pointing to the moon, don't worship the finger.
I
In other
love that
words,
phrase. Yeah.
yeah, like he and I was like, oh, this is different. He didn't like people taking pictures with him. He didn't like idolize. He didn't want to be idolized. And it was like, take the teachings and do the work. And it's not about me. I'm just the messenger. Don't kill the messenger and don't worship the messenger.
Yep. Yep.
So Debbie
Yep.
did an interview. If anybody is interested, I highly suggest you look it up on YouTube. It was Super Soul Sunday with Oprah 4 months before she passed away. And
Oh, wow.
it's a very revealing. I think after you read my story, if you watch that, you could see how,
Okay.
you know, how how complicated she was, and how um, you know, but we often teach what we most need to learn. I remember one time I was with her at Esalen, and in the teacher's lounge, there was a sign and it said, be careful if you go slaying dragons, not to become one yourself. And sometimes she could be a little dragonish, she was a tough cookie. So God rest her soul. I love her. I think that work changed my life. I teach it. Every person who works with me or comes to a retreat has to read that book, Dark Side of the Light Chasers.
Oh, interesting.
Required
Okay.
reading.
Okay. Might be something I need to check out then.
Yeah. I would say read the chapter. Don't do at the end of each chapter, she gives you like something to do. She was teaching subpersonality work. Alanis Morissette did the work the year before me with Debbie, and she went on to really get into inner child work, and a lot of us
Mhm.
followed her path. And
Yeah.
when we did, I saw the best way to embrace a shadow is relate with it as a child.
Hmm.
There's a reason why we act out, right? When this past week I didn't get something I wanted and I was being petulant like a child, and I finally realized I was creating suffering for myself, I didn't need to name that petulant child Petulant Patty, which is subpersonality work. I just went, little Jana, I know, honey, you didn't get nice dresses when you were little, and you didn't get what you wanted. And we got to manage that, and like, so I treat it different. I understand that I have reasons to act out the way I do sometimes because of my conditioning, because of my trauma, because of my childhood. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I think we all have things that we need to tend to, and if we let ourselves listen and feel those feelings, then we can do that work and honor it and honor ourselves. And I think that's really beautiful and important, and it's critical to being a healthy human.
Yeah, not judging it, right? It's like if we judge that part of ourselves, why am I that way, and try to get rid
It's
of
really
it,
that's repressing. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
like trying to cut off your arm. Like, I don't need this. I'm trying to get rid of it. No, it's an integral part of me, right?
Yes.
Like, so
Yes.
if I love it, then I can embrace it. Then I can be with it, right? And then it settles down. It's like a screaming child. You see them at the grocery store all the time. The worst thing is a parent starts screaming at them. That's not
Yeah.
going to do anything. You need to wrap them up. Everything's okay. Calm down. Let's breathe, get coherent, and let's leave the grocery store, because clearly the child's melting down,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yep. That's totally true.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
have to be kind to those children.
Right. That's what it is. Being kind to ourselves is essentially. Yeah. It's like, oh, little Jana is sad. She didn't get her way. Not make fun of her. Boo hoo. Get over it. Like, if I had a little girl and I said that to her, that would be very bad parenting.
Yes.
But if I said to her, I know, honey, you're sad, and it hurts mommy that you're sad, but I love you, and this too shall pass, or whatever, I
Yeah.
soothe her, then that's a whole different, it's respecting yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Respecting yourself. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think we're coming close. Yeah. It's 5:55 my time. That's a good number. Um, would you like to share any parting wisdom or information about how people can get your book? It's available on Amazon. And your website, I believe, is janawilson.com. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the author website. The retreat website
Okay.
is emotionalhealingretreats.com. Some people don't like to buy from Amazon. So just for the listeners who are that way, it's available at any bookstore. They can order it. All they have to do is give the title and the name, and they can order it for them. Barnes and Noble also has it. So it's available, in everywhere books are available. It's available worldwide. So
Worldwide. Super cool.
yeah, and the Audible, my intention is to have it finished by the end of the year and available, because I know a lot of people, there's a big, huge share of people who love podcasts, who love
Yep.
listening to books. When the
Yep.
author, as you said, reads the book, it takes on a whole different,
Much.
yeah.
I
So
hope I completely understand how difficult that is, and I would understand if you decide to not continue with it. But if you do, yeah, there are a lot of people that will really appreciate that. Like I
I think so.
personally, I'm on the computer all the time. I'm reading all the time. I am grateful when I'm able to listen. And then when it's the
Me
author's
too.
voice, it's really amazing.
Me
But
too.
your book covers some incredibly painfully difficult things. So I understand that was, not a route you took. But there's also amazingly beautiful, wonderful things. And so people, if you are looking for a way to recover and move through trauma, toxic relationships, domestic violence, um, all sorts of things. Jana's book is a really great way to support yourself with that process.
Thank you so much, Heather. That means so much to me. It's really heartwarming, as you know, putting your story out in the world. And and for, to be seen by other healers and people who are in this field. It means the most to me. So thank you.
You're most welcome. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Um, so everybody, if you would like to connect with Jana, I will be putting those links in show notes. And I look forward to answering any questions that you have. But please let us know what you think of the book when you read it, and I look forward to talking with you. Peace. This is Heather Kate at peacockandpaisley.com and Jana Wilson at janawilson.com.
Bye. Yeah.